The Flash has had a very tumultuous production cycle from the very get-go, but now that it's finally here, does it live up to the ridiculously long wait? Let's discuss. Hey movie fans, so I just got back from seeing the latest DC outing, The Flash. Now, as I'm sure we're all well aware by now, this movie has had a troubled production, to say the least. Even before star Ezra Miller ran into their own issues, this film has its own problems with directors and writers coming and going. You had names like Rick Famuyiwa, Lord Miller, even Robert Zemeckis at one point, I believe, was attached to this film, and no one was able to crack it. And then they brought on It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2's Andy Muschietti, and for the most part, I think Andy Muschietti delivers on a really well-made Flash movie that needs a little bit more polish in certain areas, let's be honest, but overall, I really enjoyed this movie. We're gonna break it all down, the goods, the bads, because it's not a perfect movie. We'll get into all that, and we'll try and address some of the Ezra Miller stuff as best as we can, most tactfully, but we're here to talk about the movie and the contents of the movie itself. And as a movie goes, I had so much fun with this. This is a comic book movie, and it is proud of that fact. It is kind of along the lines of if Aquaman was a better made movie, if that makes sense. It fully embraces its comic bookness. The first 20 to 30 minutes of this movie, I just had the biggest, dumbest, goofiest, grinniest grin on my face that I have had in a while in a comic book movie, just because it felt like I was reading a big crossover special from a comic of two heroes that I like meeting up and doing a thing, which kind of looks a little wonky at times, but we'll get into that in our negatives. This feels like a comic book movie from the visuals to the story. It is big and grandiose and a lot of fun, but what I love is as big and grandiose and fun as the story is, and despite what the marketing for this movie is showing you, this isn't as much of an ensemble movie as you'd expect. It's still very much a Flash story. The movie's called The Flash, and it is a Flash story. This is a Barry Allen story through and through. And Ezra Miller, for the most part, is really good in this. I don't always love the characterization of the Flash that they've gone with. They've kind of changed some things this time around that I like it a little bit more, but this incarnation I still think is not quite what I'm looking for Barry Allen. But what they're going for in this movie, I eventually was able to get on board with it, and in a very meta way, they kind of address some criticisms that people have lobbied at the character in previous incarnations, like Justice League, or even some people didn't love how he was fully portrayed in Zack Snyder's Justice League. They kind of go out in a very clever roundabout way of addressing that in this movie, and I think it works for the better. I think Ezra is good in this role. I honestly don't know what their future is at this point, and it's hard to say. Even after this movie, I'm still kind of take it or leave it. If you want to keep Ezra on, okay, if you want, but at the same time, if they decide to recast, I'm totally fine with that as well. But Barry, as a character in this, is the sole focus. It's the heart and soul of the movie, and in that respect, it's really well done. This is still a Barry story. It's not a big grand epic. It is, but it's still a personal story. So as much as they're advertising Michael Keaton's Batman and Sasha Calle Supergirl, it is still the Flash's story through and through. Speaking of Michael Keaton, though, y'all, I gotta be honest, Michael Keaton's Batman was never my favorite growing up. He was fine. I was more of a Kevin Conroy and Christian Bale type of guy myself, but they do him so well in this movie. I had a big old grin on my face almost any scene that he was in. He was so engaging to watch. There's fun callbacks with his character. It was just a lot of fun. Speaking of callbacks, there's a lot of Easter eggs in this. Some very overt, others not so much. Let's just say, for me personally, there is one Easter egg in particular that I was very happy that I'm sure not nearly enough people are going to be talking about coming out of this. There's going to be other Easter eggs that people are going to be focusing on, but there's one in particular I'm going, that matters to no one else but me, and I don't care. It makes me happy. This is not even so much for fans of like the DCEU or whatever. This is, if you are a longtime fan of DC just in general, or the comics world of DC, or just in general, I think you'll find some very fun and very deep-cut references. This is a celebration of the world of DC, and that made me, as a DC fan, very, very happy. Now, let's get into some negatives before we round this back out with some positives. I had heard going into this movie that the CGI was a bit questionable. Y'all, somehow you undersold that. I will say this, though. The CG is noticeably bad in quite a few sections. And I know Andy Muschietti has come out and be like, hey, well, it was an artistic choice for certain scenes. I'm going, certain scenes I kind of understand, but other scenes, let's just say the baby in Twilight is no longer the most terrifying CGI baby I've ever seen in a movie. Oh, gosh. But it's not all quite there yet. It was never distracting. To me, that's a sign that your movie's not working, is if the CGI is taking you out of it from a narrative perspective. It is glaringly bad at times, but I was still invested in the story and the action, and the story being told was still good enough to overcome this movie that, has been in the works forever, still can't polish out their CGI, but it wasn't bad all the time, but certain people's faces looked a little bit off. And we've gone this far, it's kind of difficult to not talk about the elephant in the room with this movie with Ezra Miller. They're good in this role, but there are definitely some moments and some lines that, like, just when you started to forget about everything, they kind of make some not great jokes or situations going, oh yeah, if literally anybody else in the world was saying this, I'd be much more comfortable right now, because I'm not oblivious to everything around it. Maybe that's just me. Like, it's grody. I'm going to bring that word back. It doesn't always work for me. Again, if it was up to me, I don't bring Ezra back, but it's a difficult situation that I don't feel the most qualified to speak on. What do I know? I'm a dude on YouTube. I'm glad I'm not the one making decisions going forward for this. It is difficult at times to fully engage with the character of Flash just because you just see Ezra. They're working really, really hard to overcome that. They're good in the performance for what is written. I still don't always love the characterizations that they pick for Barry. It's not the Barry that I know and love from the comics, and maybe I can grow into it if this character is sticking around. I'm not sure. But it is difficult to see through what we know about the person of Ezra Miller. It is distracting. I tried to put it to the side, and sometimes it worked. Other times it is just like, oh yeah, I remember, because it was everywhere. I will also say that the villain in this movie is a bit just thrown in there, because they're like, oh, I guess we should have some form of an antagonistic force. Like, the villain just kind of pops up and isn't necessarily the most engaging. I will say there was a route that I was afraid that they were going to go with the villain, that thankfully they didn't. There's still that material for another movie, but the villain it kind of felt unnecessary. There's a broader threat out there than just a singular force, so I would have just stuck with that broader looming threat than to actually narrow it down to one specific being that you kind of ham-fisted in there. I also said that this is a Flash movie through and through. Perfect. Michael Keaton's Batman is fantastic. Sasha Calle's Supergirl gets the short end of the stick. The trailers make you think like she's going to be this big part in the movie, and the limited parts that we get her in are a lot of fun, but don't go into this movie thinking you're going to get a lot of Supergirl. She's good in the small doses that we get, but she's not the big factor that the trailers are making you think. So I think some supporting characters could have gotten a little bit more to do, but yeah, it's a Flash story. I can't complain about the fact that non-Flash characters aren't getting the spotlight. It should be about Barry. That's a good thing that it's focused on them, but could have gone with a little bit more Supergirl in this movie. Lastly, to round out our positives, I really just like some of the action that they do for this. They do some really, really cool things with speed, but it never once feels like they're just copying from X-Men Days of Future Past. Like, we know that that's one of the best uses of speed with Quicksilver. It does, but doesn't feel like that. It feels like they're trying to do their own unique spin on speed and the powers that come with speed. They also do a really good job of, if you aren't overly familiar with Flash lore and like what all entails with his powers, they do a good job of like kind of walking you into it and being like, no, he's more than just fast. he can do a lot of really, really cool and unique things. They actually showcase the Flash's powers besides I go fast now, which was really refreshing to see. I won't tell you the full extent of what he does, but I'm going, cool, you actually are thinking outside the box with this character and what they can do. The action's great. It's just a lot of fun. It's comedic, but not MCU levels of comedic. And I won't say all the jokes landed. They don't. But this movie is funnier than I expected, but the humor doesn't overstay its welcome like some other comic book movies recently. It was funny when it needed to be. There's a lot of great Easter eggs and cameos, but at the same time, don't go into this expecting a ton of cameos. It's a lot like Spider-Verse. I think there's the right amount of cameos, and they're used correctly, I think. Minus, I know there's some cameos are rubbing some people the wrong way, and I completely understand that and how they're utilized. I'm going, okay, I can see that argument. It is a little weird, but not going into spoilers. I like that we're acknowledging all of DC history, but it comes back to some CGI. It could have been a little bit better. We'll say that. But overall, I don't know what is in store for the future of The Flash as a character or DC. I don't know how this movie is projected to do this weekend or long-term at the box office. It's just DC's in a weird spot right now, but at least for me, I've enjoyed the past few things that they've done with Shazam: Fury of the Gods. I'm still excited for Aquaman despite some things I'm hearing. I just kind of looking forward to Superman Legacy, so we can just kind of reset, kind of figure out whatever the new plan is. I really, really enjoy this one, but it does kind of have this weird feeling of like, is this old? Is this part of the new? I don't quite know. There's a lot of different routes that we can go with this, but overall, I really, really enjoyed The Flash, and I kind of hope we get more movies in this vein, so to speak. Maybe not exactly like this, but something similar of, oh yeah, this is kind of campy, but that's a good thing. But what do you guys think? Have you seen The Flash yet? Are you looking forward to it? Are you going to skip this one, maybe see Blue Beetle instead? Whatever your thoughts, positive or negative, let me know that in the comments below. I always like hearing from you guys. And as always, if you like what you see and you want to see more, subscribe to the channel. And as always, stay sharp, movie guys and gals.